The first winter of captivity had settled over the prison camp like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Frost clung to the barbed wire, sparkling cruelly in the pale morning light, and the ground beneath the barracks was a frozen wasteland that crunched under the weight of weary boots. Anton Petrov, barely 19, shivered as he pulled his thin coat tighter around his shoulders. He had been a soldier only a year before, a young man with ideals and dreams, thrown into the chaos of the Eastern Front. Now, months into captivity, he understood the true meaning of suffering, endurance, and the silent power of hope. The camp was a maze of wooden barracks, frozen mud paths, and high fences topped with barbed wire. German guards patrolled regularly, their boots stomping in rhythm across the snow, rifles slung over their shoulders. Inside the barracks, Anton could hear the coughing and murmurs of his fellow prisoners, the mix of despair and quiet determination that kept them alive. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, frostbiting their fingers and toes, but none of that compared to the psychological weight of isolation. Communication with the outside world was impossible, or so the captors believed. Anton had learned quickly that ordinary letters would be confiscated, read, and destroyed. Any attempt to describe the conditions of the camp could lead to severe punishment, or worse. Yet, he could not simply remain silent. He had family waiting in Leningrad, unaware of his fate. The thought of them wondering, praying, perhaps grieving for him, kept him awake at night. And so, he devised a system, a secret code, a way to speak across the invisible barriers that separated him from the world he had left behind. The code began with small steps. Each letter written was layered with meanings hidden in plain sight. Ordinary phrases contained alternate readings. The positioning of words on the page, the use of capital letters, and even the length of sentences, all of it was part of a carefully crafted cipher that only his family would understand. The first few attempts had been crude, awkward, and difficult even for Anton himself to decipher, but over time, the system evolved. He began to encode entire messages in what appeared to be simple updates: "I am well," or "the weather is cold." Beneath the surface, these phrases carried precise information about his location, the conditions of the camp, and the well-being of fellow prisoners. The danger of discovery was ever present. Guards would occasionally glance at the letters as prisoners tried to smuggle them past inspection. A single raised eyebrow could spell trouble. Anton had learned to write in the tiniest script, folding the letters into envelopes crafted from scraps of paper or even the inside of packaging. Ink was precious and often improvised from soot and water. Every stroke of the pen had to be calculated, precise, and quick. One slip could compromise the entire system. Even under the harshest conditions, Anton found a rhythm. Each night, after roll call and the meager evening meal, he would sit under the faint glow of a tallow candle or the moonlight streaming through the narrow window, hunched over his makeshift writing table. He would take out a scrap of paper and begin the delicate process of constructing a letter. One word at a time, one sentence at a time, he layered messages beneath the ordinary words. To the untrained eye, it was a simple account of daily life: frost on the fences, the scarcity of bread, the laughter of some prisoners who had managed to keep their spirits. To his family, it conveyed far more: an entire map of his experiences, survival, and hidden warnings. The ingenuity required to maintain this correspondence kept Anton's mind sharp, a lifeline in a world designed to strip him of agency. He began to notice patterns in the behavior of guards and prisoners alike, using these to refine his code further. Even the arrangement of lines on a page could convey numbers. Punctuation marks became symbolic keys. Every detail mattered. Anton's letters were no longer just notes, they were a system of survival, a language that could preserve his existence, and perhaps even the lives of others around him. Winter deepened. The cold became more relentless, and illness began to spread through the camp. Prisoners suffered from frostbite, dysentery, and typhus. Anton watched as men younger and older than him succumbed to the harsh conditions. The fear of being next weighed heavily on his chest. But writing gave him a sense of purpose, a measure of control in a world where freedom had been stripped away. Each encoded letter was a statement of defiance. He would survive, he would communicate, he would endure. On one particularly harsh night, Anton sat writing a letter that would later become one of his most critical messages. Outside, the wind howled through the fences, and the snow blew in gusts that rattled the barracks. Inside, Anton moved carefully, aware that any sound could draw attention. He wrote of the cold, of the need for firewood, of the small kindnesses shared among prisoners. To anyone else, it would appear mundane. But to those trained in his code, every sentence contained layers of meaning: a count of guards, the location of hidden supplies, the state of illness among prisoners, and subtle signals about impending inspections. Anton had also realized that secrecy required more than just clever writing. Letters had to be transported carefully. Trusted prisoners, sympathetic civilians, and even bribed guards sometimes became unwitting couriers. Each handoff was fraught with danger. If intercepted, the letter could not only put Anton at risk but also those who had helped him. Despite the danger, the letters reached their destinations, carrying fragments of Anton's life, encrypted in ways that only his family could decode. Months passed. The letters became more complex, more refined. Anton's code grew into a sophisticated system that could convey detailed information about the camp's conditions, prisoner movements, and even coded warnings about upcoming raids or transfers. By now, he had developed an almost instinctive ability to see multiple layers of meaning in a single word or phrase. Each letter he wrote was an exercise in intelligence, discipline, and ingenuity. One evening, a fellow prisoner approached Anton quietly, carrying a scrap of paper from the outside world. It was the first letter he had received in months. With trembling hands, Anton unfolded the paper and read the words written by his family. They were simple messages of hope and love, but Anton recognized the hidden subtext. They had begun to understand his coding system, responding in kind. Even in the bleakest conditions, a fragile thread connected him to the world beyond the fences, a reminder that survival was not only physical but also mental and emotional. The camp authorities, unaware of the coded correspondence taking place, continued their routine. Guards demanded work details, counted prisoners, and enforced the harsh rules of captivity. Anton and a few others learned to move invisibly, using the monotony of camp life to conceal their covert communications. Every day required vigilance, yet the letters carried a sense of empowerment. They were more than words, they were a map of resilience, a testament to the human will to endure, and a silent rebellion against the forces attempting to strip them of their dignity. Anton's system eventually expanded beyond letters. He began to use drawings, symbols, and even small gestures to convey messages within the camp itself. A tilted mug on a table, the arrangement of personal belongings, a particular pattern of sweeping the barracks floor, all became part of a secret language that only those attuned to it could interpret. The letters remained the core, the anchor that connected him to his family, but the expanding code became a network of communication, subtle and resilient. As winter wore on, Anton began to sense that the coded letters were not only a survival tool but also a moral force. They reminded him of who he was, where he came from, and what he hoped to return to. Each sentence, each carefully concealed meaning, carried the weight of memory, identity, and determination. And though the prison camp sought to erase individuality, the letters preserved it, one word at a time. By the end of the first year in captivity, Anton had written dozens of letters, each layered with meaning, each a lifeline. The letters had survived confiscations, inspections, and near discoveries. Each one carried a piece of Anton's spirit, a declaration that even in a place designed to strip humanity away, he remained a man with thoughts, emotions, and agency. The letters were his legacy of resistance, the secret code that transformed ordinary paper into a testament of survival and hope. And so, the first part of Anton's story ends not with a dramatic escape or a heroic act, but with the quiet, deliberate act of writing. In the small barracks, amidst frost and hunger, the pen became a weapon, the paper a shield, and the code a lifeline. The letters were more than communication, they were proof that even in the darkest of places, ingenuity and human will could preserve connection, identity, and the possibility of hope. The first thaw of spring brought little relief to the prisoners. Snow began to melt, forming icy puddles in the paths between barracks, turning the ground into a slippery, treacherous morass. The barbed wire fences glistened in the weak sunlight, as if mocking the prisoners with its unyielding presence. Anton had learned long ago that change in the weather could bring both opportunity and danger. Melted snow exposed patrol paths and hidden corners where guards might spot a secretive exchange. It also allowed small rivers of water to form, which could carry messages more secretly if used with caution. Anton's letters continued to grow in sophistication. The coded system he had developed was no longer just a series of symbols hidden in ordinary words. He had begun to employ multi-layered encryption, blending imagery, wordplay, and subtle shifts in grammar to convey complex information. The fire in the barracks warms us well could mean there was a guard rotation nearby, while the bread is sour today might indicate a shortage of supplies. Each seemingly mundane phrase carried the weight of survival and strategy. The daily routine of camp life was merciless, a relentless pattern of despair. Morning roll call was conducted with military precision. Prisoners stood shivering in the frost, counted again and again, their breaths forming clouds of vapor in the cold air. Work details were assigned, from chopping wood in near-freezing rivers to repairing fences and cleaning the barracks. Each task was an exercise in endurance, a test of patience, and a stage for Anton's quiet defiance. During these work details, Anton observed patterns, how guards reacted to certain prisoners, the timing of inspections, and even the smallest gestures of fellow captives. All of these observations fed into his coded letters. He noticed, for example, that when a particular guard left early, the prisoners could safely smuggle scraps of information to one another without being noticed. Or that the placement of certain logs by the fire could serve as signals for message handoffs. Anton's mind, sharpened by months of captivity, became a map of possibilities, an invisible network that allowed him to transmit information across the camp and beyond. One of Anton's closest companions, Dmitri, had also become involved in the secret correspondence. Dmitri had been captured months after Anton and had witnessed the harsh realities of other camps. He was older, hardened by years of work on the front lines, yet his eyes held the same spark of ingenuity that Anton carried. Together, they devised new methods for smuggling letters, using the hollowed-out handles of tools, embedding scraps of paper in bundles of firewood, and even exchanging coded notes through brief touches or hand gestures. Each method carried risk, but also the exhilarating possibility of connection. Food remained scarce. Prison rations were minimal, often just a thin slice of bread and a watery soup. Prisoners learned to share scraps, to barter for extra portions, and to salvage whatever could be gathered from the snow-covered grounds. Yet even in hunger, the act of writing provided sustenance of a different kind. Anton often found that his most detailed letters were written after days of exhaustion, when his body was weak but his mind sharp. Writing became both a discipline and a refuge, a way to maintain control over the uncontrollable. One afternoon, Anton received word of a planned transfer to another section of the camp. The movement was to take place under the cover of early morning fog, and the prisoners were warned to be ready. For many, this news was terrifying. Transfers could mean exposure to harsher conditions, more brutal guards, or isolation from comrades. For Anton, it represented a challenge and an opportunity. He carefully encoded instructions into the letters, warning those he trusted about potential dangers and advising small measures to ensure survival. The code allowed him to communicate crucial information while maintaining the appearance of ordinary correspondence. The transfer itself was a grueling ordeal. Prisoners marched for hours over frozen paths, their breaths misting in the cold air, the fog obscuring the landscape. Guards shouted commands and prodded the men forward, their boots leaving deep impressions in the muddy ground beneath melting snow. Anton moved with the group, observing, memorizing, and noting every detail that might be useful in his letters. Every alley, every bend in the path, and every temporary shelter became part of the encoded map he would later transmit. Once settled in the new barracks, Anton discovered additional opportunities for encoding messages. The layout of the new space allowed for subtle signaling. A particular stack of firewood could indicate the location of hidden supplies. The placement of clothing or blankets could convey instructions. Anton's letters now included references to these physical markers, allowing information to flow between prisoners in ways that were invisible to the guards. Winter had been brutal, but spring brought its own dangers. Illness spread rapidly as temperatures fluctuated. Prisoners with weakened immune systems succumbed to fevers, dysentery, and pneumonia. Anton wrote detailed warnings in his letters, alerting others to symptoms, remedies, and hidden sources of clean water. The encoded messages could be life-saving, offering knowledge that guards would have otherwise suppressed. His letters became both a shield and a lifeline, carrying the experience and ingenuity of a young man determined to protect his fellow captives. One evening, after a long day of exhausting labor, Anton sat by a small stove in the barracks, a scrap of paper before him. He dipped his improvised ink pen into soot and water and began a new letter. Each word was chosen with care, each sentence layered with meaning. To the untrained eye, he wrote about the bitter cold, the scarcity of bread, and the camaraderie among prisoners. Beneath these words, hidden in plain sight, were precise instructions for safe movement within the camp, warnings of guard rotations, and subtle clues about secret caches of supplies. Anton's letters had evolved into a form of intelligence work, complex, detailed, and vital. Anton's letters were occasionally intercepted, though rarely. The guards were diligent but not omniscient. When a letter was confiscated, Anton learned to adapt, changing codes, revising methods, and ensuring that no single letter could compromise the entire system. The risk never left him, yet it sharpened his focus. Every stroke of the pen became an act of strategy, every folded envelope a potential lifeline. Amidst the monotony of camp life, Anton also recorded moments of humanity, small acts of kindness that persisted despite suffering. Prisoners shared stories, taught one another survival skills, and comforted those on the brink of despair. Anton's letters captured these moments, providing a sense of hope and continuity for those reading them outside the camp. Even a simple description of a shared meal or a joke could carry coded instructions, but it also reminded readers that life persisted, even in captivity. Spring turned into summer, and the camp buzzed with the activity of new prisoners and shifting dynamics. Anton's letters grew longer and more sophisticated, documenting months of observation, survival strategies, and coded warnings. He began to include references to events beyond the camp, news of the front lines, the changing tides of the war, and small pieces of information gleaned from sympathetic guards or scavenged newspapers. Each letter became a repository of knowledge, a map of resilience, and a record of human ingenuity under extreme duress. By the end of this period, Anton had developed a full system of secret communication, one that allowed for the transmission of complex information across time and space. His letters were no longer just messages, they were tools of survival, intelligence, and human connection. Even as the camp continued its relentless cycle of hardship, Anton's code provided a sense of agency, a measure of control in a world designed to strip it away. The second part of Anton's story closes with the realization that writing was more than a survival tactic. It was an act of defiance, a way to preserve identity, to resist dehumanization, and to maintain the fragile connection to the world beyond the fences. His letters, encoded with care and ingenuity, were proof that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit could endure, adapt, and communicate. The summer sun had arrived, relentless and unyielding. It bore down on the camp with an intensity that made the thin walls of the barracks feel like an oven. The prisoners, once frozen and pale, now moved sluggishly under the heat, their energy sapped by both exhaustion and dehydration. The snow and ice of winter had long vanished, replaced by dust, mud, and the faint, acrid smell of smoke from the kitchen fires. Yet, amidst this sweltering monotony, Anton's mind remained alert, constantly searching for openings and opportunities to send his coded letters further into the world. Summer brought new prisoners, displaced soldiers from distant fronts, men who spoke languages Anton did not understand. He carefully observed them, noting habits, fears, and the few glimmers of trustworthiness. Each new prisoner was a potential link in his network, a new conduit for coded correspondence. Anton devised ways to integrate them into his system without exposing the older, established routes. A subtle nod, a phrase spoken softly in the dining area, a folded scrap left under a floorboard, all became part of the intricate web of communication. The letters themselves grew more elaborate. Anton began using multi-tiered codes that incorporated both text and illustrations. A sketch of a loaf of bread could indicate the location of hidden rations, while the position of a drawn tree might map guard patrols or safe hiding spots. He had learned to blend artistry with encryption, ensuring that even if a letter fell into the wrong hands, it appeared innocent and mundane. The skill required patience, precision, and foresight. Each stroke of the pen carried weight, each mark could mean the difference between life and death. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barracks, Anton sat with Dmitri, carefully examining the latest batch of letters. "We've done well," Dmitri said, his voice low, eyes scanning the room for patrolling guards. "But we must remain vigilant. They are learning, slowly, but they are learning." Anton nodded. He knew that with every successful message, the risk increased. The camp's administration had begun random searches, looking for hidden messages or signs of collaboration. Prisoners were interrogated, punished, or relocated at a moment's notice. The constant threat of exposure made Anton's work perilous, yet it also reinforced the necessity of ingenuity. Each letter had to be flawless, each code unbreakable by casual inspection. The daily life of the camp continued its harsh rhythm. Prisoners worked in the fields, repaired fences, or were assigned to labor details that tested their physical limits. The heat of summer made the work grueling, sweat mixing with grime, clothes sticking to skin, bodies aching with fatigue. Yet even in the midst of suffering, small moments of camaraderie persisted. A shared piece of bread, a whispered joke, or a silent nod of understanding created bonds that were stronger than any chain or barbed wire fence. Anton's letters often reflected these moments, embedding hidden meanings within descriptions of mundane events. One particularly tense day, Anton learned of an impending inspection by high-ranking officers. The prisoners were warned to be on their best behavior, and the usual routines were disrupted. Anton realized that this inspection could compromise the coded letters, as guards would be more thorough, more suspicious, more relentless. He quickly revised his coding system, creating a backup method that relied on objects rather than words. Small scratches on a door frame, the arrangement of bedding, even the order of utensils could carry messages. This method allowed him to maintain communication even when letters were too risky to send. Despite the oppressive conditions, Anton's letters began to reach sympathetic allies outside the camp. Families received notes that appeared to be simple accounts of daily life, yet hidden within were instructions, intelligence, and reassurances. The letters conveyed the resilience of the prisoners, their resourcefulness, and their refusal to be silenced. Each successful delivery reinforced Anton's determination, proving that even in captivity, influence could extend beyond the fences. As the summer progressed, Anton encountered a new challenge: mistrust among prisoners. Fear and suspicion had begun to fester, as the constant threat of betrayal weighed heavily on everyone. Some prisoners had been forced to inform on others under duress, creating tension and paranoia. Anton understood that maintaining trust was essential for the survival of the communication network. He devoted himself to subtle acts of reassurance, ensuring that the coding system was both secure and supported by the loyalty of those he trusted. During these months, Anton also discovered the importance of observation. He meticulously noted guard behavior, changes in routines, and even the subtleties of their interactions. A guard who scratched his ear before a search, a slight delay in a patrol, a hurried glance at a particular barracks corner, each detail could be crucial. These observations were incorporated into his letters, disguised as casual commentary on weather, meals, or camp events. Anton's mind had become a living record of the camp, translating observations into coded instructions with precision and foresight. Illness continued to plague the prisoners. Summer heat and limited water created ideal conditions for the spread of disease. Anton took it upon himself to write letters that advised on hygiene, treatment, and prevention, using coded phrases to avoid suspicion. "The river runs slowly today" could indicate water contamination, while "the baker's loaf is unusually dry" might warn of potential food shortages. These codes allowed prisoners to access critical information without drawing attention. One night, as Anton rested on his thin mattress, he reflected on the nature of his work. The act of writing had transformed from a survival tactic into a form of resistance. Each letter was a testament to ingenuity, courage, and defiance. In a world designed to strip away individuality, Anton's codes preserved identity, intelligence, and humanity. He had become both a chronicler and a strategist, a young man whose pen wielded power beyond his physical confinement. The summer months also brought moments of hope. Prisoners occasionally received news from outside the camp, new developments on the front lines, reports of victories or losses, and glimpses of a world beyond the fences. Anton carefully incorporated these details into his letters, ensuring that morale remained intact. He wrote of distant forests, towns, and rivers, embedding coded messages that conveyed movement, opportunity, and survival strategies. Each letter became a bridge between the captive world and the freedom that still existed beyond the barbed wire. By the end of summer, Anton's system had evolved into a sophisticated network of letters, signals, and coded gestures. Prisoners relied on his ingenuity, using the system to share resources, avoid danger, and maintain contact with the outside world. Each letter was a blend of ordinary narrative and hidden instruction, a balance that required constant vigilance, creativity, and foresight. Anton had become a master of coded communication, transforming the simple act of writing into a tool of resilience, strategy, and hope. The third part of Anton's story concludes with the understanding that communication was not just a means of survival, it was a weapon, a lifeline, and a testament to human ingenuity. Even in the harshest conditions, he had created a network that transcended fear, distance, and oppression. His letters, hidden in plain sight, carried the voices, hopes, and strategies of a generation of prisoners determined to endure. Autumn arrived quietly, bringing cooler winds that whispered through the barracks and stirred the dust in the camp. For the prisoners, the change in season meant not only a drop in temperature but also a shift in routine. Work details became longer, searches more frequent, and the guards' scrutiny sharper. Anton could sense the tension thickening in the air. Rumors of impending transfers circulated among the men. The camp administration was tightening its control, responding to what they considered unruly behavior, though in reality, it was Anton's coded letters that had drawn attention. Despite the looming threat, Anton remained undeterred. Every morning, He rose before dawn, carefully inspecting the barracks for signs of tampering or surveillance. He reviewed his coded alphabets, sequences, and illustrations, ensuring that no errors had crept into the system. One small mistake could unravel months of careful work and expose not only himself but everyone connected to his network. The letters now carried additional layers of meaning. Beyond the basic codes of sustenance and security, Anton began embedding intelligence about the larger war efforts. Reports from escaped prisoners, scraps of news from guards, and subtle hints from intercepted communications allowed him to draft letters that provided insight into troop movements, enemy strategies, and geopolitical developments. The coded messages had become more than tools for survival, they were fragments of history, preserved under impossible conditions. Winter's approach brought a renewed urgency. Cold winds tore through the fences, and frost formed on the ground before sunrise. The prisoners' health deteriorated rapidly, frostbite, malnutrition, and respiratory illnesses became widespread. Yet, Anton's letters adapted to the changing conditions. Phrases disguised as casual observations conveyed warnings about frost, disease, and the dangers of venturing outdoors during early morning inspections. The coded system now included subtle signals for medical needs, ration distribution, and hidden caches of blankets and supplies. On one particularly frigid night, Anton discovered a betrayal. A newly arrived prisoner, coerced by guards, had attempted to decipher the code, and some of the letters had been intercepted. Anton's heart sank, understanding the immediate danger this posed. He convened a secret meeting with his trusted aides, devising a contingency plan to protect the remaining messages and maintain the network. Each person was assigned a new code, different from the previous sequences, ensuring that even if some letters were discovered, the bulk of the communication system would remain intact. The betrayal forced Anton to evolve the system further. He introduced invisible inks derived from kitchen supplies, lemon juice, diluted vinegar, and certain plant extracts, to write secondary codes within each letter. These invisible markings contained critical instructions, warnings, and intelligence that could only be revealed by careful heating or chemical treatment. The guards were unaware, inspecting only the visible text, and Anton's network continued functioning under the radar. Amidst these developments, Anton's personal resolve hardened. He had witnessed the slow erosion of morale in the camp, yet the coded letters gave prisoners a sense of agency and connection. Men who had once felt helpless began to act strategically, passing along messages, sharing intelligence, and assisting with hidden tasks. The letters became the backbone of a subtle resistance, unseen, silent, and formidable. One day, Anton received unexpected news, a letter from a former ally who had successfully escaped the camp. The message contained not only news of the outside world but instructions for expanding the network, suggesting new safe drop points and methods for clandestine delivery. This was a turning point. Anton realized that the letters were no longer just survival tools, they were part of a larger operation, capable of influencing events far beyond the confines of the prison camp. However, with expansion came greater risk. Guards became more suspicious, searching barracks more frequently, questioning prisoners for longer durations, and even deploying sniffer dogs in certain areas. Anton adapted once more, incorporating decoy letters filled with innocuous details to mislead the administration while the critical messages traveled undetected. These decoys were carefully crafted to appear authentic, mixing mundane observations with coded hints that only the intended recipient could decipher. The winter months were harsh. Blizzards and icy conditions made movement perilous, rations were severely limited, and disease claimed more lives each day. Yet, Anton and his allies persisted. The letters became lifelines, providing practical guidance and moral support. One letter advised, in code, how to create makeshift heaters using scraps of wood and metal. Another described a method for improvising medical treatment using limited supplies. Every word mattered, every line had a purpose beyond what it appeared to convey. Despite the extreme conditions, Anton found moments of humanity. Prisoners would gather quietly in corners of the barracks, exchanging small smiles, sharing stories, or simply reading letters aloud in hushed tones. These moments of connection reinforced the purpose behind the coded messages. Anton understood that the letters were not only practical but symbolic, a testament to resilience, creativity, and hope. The culmination of Anton's efforts occurred one bitterly cold night when a new batch of letters was ready for dispatch. These letters contained detailed instructions for ration distribution, coded intelligence on guard movements, and messages of encouragement to maintain morale. Anton meticulously checked each letter, reviewing codes, invisible inks, and cross-references. The operation required absolute precision, even a minor error could compromise months of work. As the letters were hidden and secret delivery routes activated, Anton reflected on the journey. The network he had built had survived betrayal, harsh weather, disease, and suspicion. It had enabled prisoners to communicate, strategize, and endure. The system had grown beyond his initial conception, incorporating multiple layers of security, observation, and creativity. What began as a desperate attempt at survival had evolved into a sophisticated form of resistance, demonstrating the power of ingenuity and determination under extreme oppression. In the final weeks before liberation, Anton's coded letters continued to flow. The prisoners were aware that the end of captivity was approaching, yet the network remained active. Letters served as documentation of the camp's history, a record of human resilience, and proof that even in the darkest conditions, communication and intellect could not be extinguished. Each message was a testament to courage, resourcefulness, and the refusal to surrender one's agency. When liberation finally arrived, Anton's letters became invaluable. Allies and historians used the messages to understand the conditions, strategies, and experiences of the prisoners. Each letter revealed not only the daily hardships but the intelligence, courage, and humanity that had persisted despite unimaginable adversity. The coded network, once a tool for survival, had transformed into a historical archive, preserving voices that might otherwise have been lost to time. Anton's ingenuity had ensured that even after liberation, the lessons of the letters endured. Scholars studied the codes, researchers examined the methods, and descendants of the prisoners discovered the bravery embedded in each line. What began as a desperate act of resistance had become a beacon of human determination, proving that even in captivity, intellect, creativity, and courage could transcend the most oppressive circumstances. The POW's secret code was more than a method of communication, it was a symbol of resilience. It demonstrated that even when faced with overwhelming odds, the human spirit could find ways to adapt, survive, and preserve not only life but knowledge, dignity, and hope. Anton's letters, hidden in plain sight, carried the voices of the imprisoned forward, ensuring that the world would remember not just the suffering, but the ingenuity, bravery, and perseverance of those who refused to be silenced. The final entry in Anton's series of letters, written in the fading light of the barracks before liberation, encapsulated everything he had fought for. Though it appeared as a simple note about the weather and daily routines, its coded message conveyed gratitude, instructions for continued communication, and a vision for rebuilding lives after the horrors of imprisonment. The words, like the letters themselves, endured beyond the prison walls, a testament to a life defined not by confinement but by courage, intelligence, and the unyielding will to survive.